Revelation 2777. From the 16th and the 17th of June 1943. Teaching in the hereafter, as on earth. In the spiritual kingdom only those beings are admitted to the teaching ministry who possess knowledge which covers all areas. Every being can certainly pass on the knowledge it calls its own to the ignorant souls in the beyond, but an all-encompassing knowledge is demanded of beings whose activity is the constant teaching of earthly children or also of the souls in the beyond. These beings have a high degree of maturity. They always and constantly receive their knowledge from God and therefore constantly increase in wisdom, although they in turn distribute it accordingly. Hence, as soon as a human being on earth is destined to introduce his fellow human beings to divine wisdom, he must have received this wisdom beforehand. He must have been instructed himself beforehand in a way which completely excludes error. And this teaching ministry is carried out by those beings which are in closest contact with God and received the truth from God Himself as a constant flow of strength. The activity of all beings in the beyond who stand in the light consists of passing on what the being itself receives. However, every being can only pass on what its degree of maturity has given it, thus the degree of light is different and the knowledge is correspondingly different. And they also have to receive this knowledge again from beings of light to whom the teaching activity is incumbent. Therefore, people on earth who are instructed by God's Spirit can trustingly leave themselves to the teachers, for they are the recipients of light and strength who directly receive light and strength from God and convey the emanation of His Spirit to earth. They are the people in whom God's Spirit is active, thus they are, as it were, taught by God Himself, although the knowledge is conveyed to them by those beings of light which are most intimately united with God, for everything full of light is one with God, except that the individual being finds the permeation of divine strength inconceivably pleasing, and therefore God transfers this activity of love to the beings which have already found union with Him because He wants to make them happy. Yet God's laws are also observed in the spiritual kingdom, and the beings cannot act arbitrarily but have to subordinate themselves to divine will, which they, however, feel as their own will. And therefore no being will push itself into an activity which exceeds its degree of maturity, which therefore acquires greater knowledge than the being possesses. And therefore the receiving human being on earth need not fear that beings approach him which, due to their own ignorance, could impart insufficient or wrong knowledge to him, for completely ignorant beings have no access to the human being who hands himself over to the working of the Spirit. Beings of light which have not reached the degree that they are able to carry out teaching activity only come to receive spiritual knowledge at the same time. Thus the human being is taught on earth, because this corresponds to divine will. But as soon as the human being is mentally instructed, the beings which are informed about the disputed issues can express themselves mentally, provided that the human being desires the pure truth and, through his way of life, makes himself worthy of being instructed in the truth. Thus does not grant the opposing forces control over himself through a way of life contrary to God's will. The most important thing, however, is to open oneself to these teachings, to let the light and knowledge dispensing beings take effect on oneself and not to oppose this work. For the knowing beings of the spiritual kingdom are close to every human being and constantly try to mentally guide him into the spiritual kingdom. If the human being gives in to this influence and desires to penetrate the truth, he can be constantly instructed, and the more demanding he is, the more detailed he will be. And now those forces come into action whose knowledge is unlimited. For the desire for truth also testifies to the desire for God, and the eternal deity therefore approaches a desiring human being itself by letting the emanation of strength of itself flow to him through bearers of light and strength. and light and strength is knowledge, deepest divine wisdom, which is now offered to the human being, mentally or through the audible inner word. The degrees of light in the spiritual kingdom are therefore decisive as to which measure of knowledge the spiritual being calls its own, and with this knowledge it now works, and again in the sphere assigned to it, where its knowledge is desired and can therefore also be distributed. These spheres can now also extend to earth, for they are not space-bound but depend on the willingness to receive and on the degree of ignorance, both on earth as well as in the spiritual kingdom. And therefore all beings which are already receivers of light can always work where the degree of maturity of the souls corresponds to the knowledge of the giving beings, where therefore the distributing being possesses the knowledge which the receiving being still lacks. But if an earthly child offers itself to God for service, that is, if it consciously wants to work at winning back the souls for God, then it also requires special knowledge for this work, that is, the human being must also receive what he wants to distribute as the Lord's laborer in the clearest and most comprehensible way. He must be instructed in such a way that all knowledge is made accessible to him, that he is well informed about the spiritual correlations of all things and walks in fullest truth himself. Such instruction, however, is only carried out by the designated teachers who, on God's behalf, introduce the human being to all wisdom. For he can only meet the demands placed on him if he is well instructed about everything concerning God's reign and activity. His office is to spread the knowledge he receives himself, thus to be active on earth as a teacher again, and this teaching activity understandably requires complete knowledge, which can only be conveyed to him by the beings of light who are in the deepest knowledge themselves. But these also watch over the human being's spiritual knowledge, thus they prevent all wrong transmission through spiritual forces. They protect the human being from erroneous thinking and always guide his thoughts towards the right realization. For with the deepest knowledge they also have the highest power at their disposal, in the face of which all less perfect beings are powerless. The ignorant, imperfect beings are denied access, for the receiving human being's desire for truth sets a barrier for them which they cannot cross. And therefore the human being can accept the imparted spiritual knowledge as profound truth with full conviction. He need not fear being misguided as soon as he humbly and lovingly places himself at God's disposal in order to be active for him on earth. His God-oriented will and the desire for the pure truth protect him from all error and also make him capable for a task which again applies to spreading the truth on earth. He can trustingly abandon himself to the beings of light and let them teach him. Amen. Amen.